2 Corinthians 3:13 through 18. We are not like Moses, who put a... Yeah, I'm a little shorter than he is, huh? Vertically challenged. We are not like Moses, who put a veil over his face so the people of Israel would not see the glory, even though it was destined to fade away. But the people's minds were hardened, and to this day, whenever the Old Covenant is being read, the same veil covers their minds so they cannot understand the truth. And this veil can be removed only by believing in Christ. Yes, even today, when they read Moses' writings, their hearts are covered with that veil, and they do not understand. But whenever someone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. For the Lord is a spirit. And wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. So all of us who have had that veil removed can see and reflect the glory of the Lord. And the Lord, who is the Spirit, makes us more and more like Him as we are changed into His glorious image.
Well, good morning and welcome. Good to see everybody this morning. And I know we're missing a few people, but I see a few new faces as well. And so I just want to encourage you that if you're here for the very first time, you make sure and grab a mug and you get mugged on your way out. Because we've got a couple mugs sitting back there on the table, and it just tells you a little bit about the church here at Fourth and College. And also there's a little gift in there, and the mug is a gift. You know, you can have the mug and drink some coffee out of it tomorrow. So when I was a youth minister here in Cordell many moons ago, we would have a Dirty Santa gift exchange around Christmas time, and I think they still do. I think we've still done Dirty Santa gift exchanges in the last few years. Does everybody know what a Dirty Santa gift exchange is? Do you know? Everybody know? Some people don't know. So basically, everybody brings a gift, right? And you put it in the middle, and then you draw numbers, and you kind of go in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, you know. And when it gets to be your turn, you can either steal somebody else's gift, or you can go and get a new gift, right? So you can steal a gift, or you can go get a new gift. And so we would have this Dirty Santa gift exchange, and some of the gifts were really good. It was an assortment of candy, you know, something like that, or a blanket, or a little toy. Some of the gifts were last minute, and you could tell, because you could basically tell that somebody had forgotten to get a gift, and so they just wrapped something real quickly from their house. And so one year, one such gift, it was actually wrapped very well. It was beautiful. It was this really pretty package. And, somebody goes and gets the gift, and they open it up, and it's a set of, it's a nose hair trimmer, like a used nose hair trimmer. It was disgusting. You remember this, Crosland? Do you remember the nose hair trimmers? I didn't know if you did or not. Anyway, so it was used nose hair trimmers, and and they worked. Like, you could hit the little button and zzz, you know. And we all got a good laugh, and that gift did not get stolen. It went home with the person that opened it. And the funny thing is that the next year, our Dirty Santa Christmas party came along, and we started playing, and there was this really pretty little package, and somebody grabbed it and opened it, and it was the nose hair trimmer again. and literally for the next 4 or 5 Christmases, this nose hair trimmer would get regifted every year, and it just kind of became this joke about who's going to get the nose hair trimmer. Because it was just so much fun. I remember one time somebody wrapped it up in this giant package. The package was like this big, and then inside was, you know, you have to get through all the different packages, and finally you find the nose hair trimmer. And so it was wonderful. But when we think of regifting something, it typically means that we have received something that we don't really like, and we want to give it back to somebody else, or we want to get rid of it, right? I mean, that's what we typically think of when we think of regifting. However, as we begin this series that we're entitling re-gifting Christmas, my goal here is not to give you something that I don't want. That's not the intention here at all. Instead, it's an effort to take an old gift that we have often taken for granted our entire lives and show you how wonderful it is. That's really the goal of this series. And it's kind of like finding that hidden treasure in the attic. You know what I'm talking about? Like when you go up into the attic and you clean it out, or maybe somebody passes away and you go and you kind of sift through all the things, and here's this beautiful thing, like maybe it's a painting from a famous painter, and it's just surrounded by junk, but you find it and it's this beautiful treasure that is worth, maybe thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it was just surrounded by junk. And we've all had those moments when we found something that was beautiful, or maybe there was something that was wonderful. Like I know somebody who found all these old pictures from hundreds of years of their family, and it was just a wonderful treasure. And that's really my goal over the next 3 weeks, is that we're going to re-gift Christmas. And so next week, Richard is actually going to chime in. He's going to have a message for you, and then I will wrap it up, pun intended, on Sunday the 24th, and we'll finish out our Re-Gifting Christmas series. So as we jump into this series, I really want to start out with an important question that kind of starts it all off, and kind of is what we're going to be exploring over the next few weeks. And that is this: what does it mean that Jesus came to earth? What does that mean? Like, we talk about this and we think about it, and during Christmas time we listen to songs about it, but what does it really mean that Jesus came to earth? You see, for some of us, celebrating the birth of our Savior is kind of an afterthought for Christmas. And we talked about that a little bit last week during our Family Sunday, right? We get together, we eat a big meal, we work on our Christmas list for months. My wife was telling me about this today, just a few days ago, that usually she has been working on her Christmas list for several weeks or months, and now that she's gotten a full-time job, she's like, my Christmas list is suffering right now, right? But we work for months on trying to get this Christmas list together. We wrap up the presents, we put them under the tree, we celebrate, we put decorations up, all those things, and for some of us, even Christmas is kind of a bittersweet time, right? Because it reminds us of voices that we no longer hear, or of money that we don't have to buy food or to buy gifts. But I'm here to tell you that Christmas can be special, even if you don't have gifts, even if you don't have food, even if you don't have those special loved ones that you remember celebrating with. It can still be a very special time. As we contemplate and think about, what does it mean that Jesus came to earth? So in Hebrews chapter 1, the Hebrew author says this about Jesus. He says, the Son radiates God's own glory and expresses the very character of God, and he sustains everything by the mighty power of his command. And this is a really powerful passage, right? Jesus radiates God's own glory. He doesn't simply reflect it. He radiates. It is within him, and it goes out from him. He expresses the very character of God. He doesn't have something, he doesn't just have some of the qualities of God. His character is God's character. He has the same power that God has. God's word is what brought this creation into being, and Jesus has that same power in his voice. If you want to say it all in one sentence, or if you want to, use a word that theologians over the years have used, you would say Jesus is the incarnation of God on earth. He's not just a king on earth. He is the King of heaven and earth. And we have been, we've been looking at this reality through the Gospel of Mark as we've traveled through the Gospel of Mark over the last several months. Everybody's trying to figure out who Jesus is, right? Everybody's trying to figure that out as we study the Gospel of Mark. And here's Jesus. He is the incarnation of God. Now, when humans think about the idea of incarnation and they separate it from the character of God, they come up with things like this. Thor. Chris Hemsworth, right? The god of thunder from Asgard who comes down and he puts the smack down on all the bad guys with mighty swings of his hammer, and then he falls in love with a beautiful woman that, complicates things immensely. That's what humans come up with when they think of God coming to earth. But that is not what should be on our minds as we think about Christmas. And the incarnation of God on earth. I mean, here's what we notice from those Thor movies, or if you read the comics. Thor is very human in the way he acts, right? I mean, like I said, he fell in love. He makes mistakes. He falls into a deep depression in which he gets really fat. Like if you've watched all the movies, that's not God, right? That's not God coming to earth. Paul gives us some really important perspective on what the incarnation means for us humans. He says in 2 Corinthians 3, verse 18, which was already read, he says, "And we all, who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit." Jesus coming to earth means transformation for you and for me. Thor didn't transform anybody, right? Thor just beats people up. Like that's what he does. But when Jesus came to earth, he came with the promise of transformation. That's what it means that God came to earth. That word transform, it comes from the Greek word metamorphomai. Okay, and it means to change and transform the essential nature of something. It's the same word that's used in Matthew chapter 17 when Jesus goes up on a mountain with his disciples and he is transformed in their presence. He sheds his earthly form and he takes on aspects of his heavenly form. But this transformation, according to Paul, it's not just in reference to Jesus, right? In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18, he says, you can also be transformed and changed. And I love that word transformation. It comes from the word that metamorphosis comes from. So if you look at this picture here, this is a caterpillar. Does anybody know what caterpillar this is? What butterfly this becomes? You know? It becomes a monarch, yes. It's a really cool looking caterpillar, right? But it's not nearly as beautiful as the butterfly that comes after, right? It's this idea. I mean, there's hardly anything that transfers from that caterpillar to that butterfly. It becomes something completely different. It's not just a change in state, right? Like water becomes ice when it gets really cold. If it gets hot, it becomes gas. It's still H2O. It's just a change in state. But this is talking about a change in your nature, right? A change in the very makeup of your being. And Paul says this is what you get to experience because Jesus came to earth. You see, when we come into the presence of the Lord, we cannot remain the same. We cannot remain the same. Like that's the reality. As we get to know Christ, he begins to transform and to change you. He changes your essential nature. He changes who you are. So let me give you just a little bit of background on 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 7 through 18, which is what Chris read for us just a moment ago. So this is referring to the story in the Old Testament that was the foundational story of Israel. Okay, the foundational story of Israel is that moment when they were slaves in Egypt and God acted and he brought them out. Right? So God performed all these amazing plagues and he brought his people out of Egypt and he led them to a place out in the wilderness known as Sinai. And while he was there, while the people of Israel were there and Moses was there, God would meet with Moses and he would impart to him the law. which was, part of that was the Ten Commandments. There's a lot more in the law. And as Moses would go and meet with God, his face would begin to glow as he was in God's presence. And so he would come down from the mountain and his face would be glowing and all the people would be afraid. And so he put a veil over his face so they wouldn't be scared by Moses' glowing face. But over time, that glowing would go away. As Moses spent time out of God's presence, the glowing in his face would fade. And Paul points out that old covenant, it came with glory. Those conversations with Moses, it came with glory, and it was such powerful glory that it caused Moses' face to glow. But that glory would slowly fade. And he says the new covenant comes with greater glory. It's not just a human who is reflecting God's glory. Rather, we have a human, the incarnation of God's glory, the incarnation of God, who is the source of the glory. It's this beautiful idea and this beautiful reality that Paul is trying to clue us into. So let me just read just a few more of these verses over again. Verse 13. We are not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face to prevent the Israelites from seeing the end of what was passing away. So Paul gives a little bit of interpretation here, right? So he's not just responding to the fact or he's not saying that Moses is putting the veil over so that he doesn't scare the Israelites. Instead, he's saying he didn't want them to see the fact that the glory was fading. That even though he spent time in the presence of God, the glory would fade. He says this, but in verse 16, but anyone who turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. You don't have to hide it. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And he goes on, he says, and we all, with unveiled faces, contemplate, think about, internalize the Lord's glory, and we are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory, which comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. And here's what Paul is saying. He's saying that because of the incarnation, because of Jesus coming to earth, we get to experience that glory in a way that Moses didn't. We get to experience in a way where it increases and it grows and it moves out from us, even though we are in bodies that are wasting away. And this is what the incarnation of Christ means. He is transforming power. Our schedules, our budgets, our career choices, our entertainment preferences, our friends, and our daily habits, they're all being transformed to reflect the glory of Christ. That's the really awesome reality that we get to experience because Christ came to earth. Let's say that you own a peach orchard. I'm sure that there's nobody in here who owns a peach orchard because we live out in western Oklahoma where we don't have orchards, right? But let's say you own a peach orchard and you found that peaches are no longer popular. Not what you need. You need apples. And so you think, all right, I've got a problem. I've got a bunch of peach trees. I've got an orchard of peach trees, but I need to have apples. And so you try some creative solutions. You try to graft in some apple branches to a peach tree, but you find out that it's not tissue compatible, that it won't grow. Then you try to plant some apple trees in the middle of your peach trees, but they don't do well in the shade of your peach trees. They don't grow because, the peach trees are taking all the sunlight and all the nutrients. And so then you decide, well, I'm just going to start praying. I'm just going to pray that God turns these peaches into apples. And what you find is that you are disappointed. You're not getting apples. You're just continuing to get peaches. Because here's the reality. You can't expect apples from peach trees. That's not going to work. you're going to have to begin to transform the orchard one tree at a time. You have to cut it down. You have to dig out the roots. And you have to plant an apple tree in its place. And that's the only way that you're going to start getting apples from your peach orchard, is if you allow it to be transformed. And this is the promise of the incarnation. This is the promise of the incarnation. He wants to come into your life, and he doesn't want you to remain the same. He wants those things in your lives that are most important, that don't connect with Christ and his way, to be dug up, to be cast aside, and for new plants to be put in that place. Right? He wants to transform you. He wants to change you over time. Again, Paul says, and we all, who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. So are you ready? Are you ready to accept the incarnation of God into your life? Maybe you need to do this for the first time. Maybe you have never accepted that incarnation into your life, and maybe you need to be baptized into Christ. Or maybe he has simply been a get-out-of-hell-free card for you, but you have never experienced the transforming presence of Jesus, of God in the flesh in your life. Are you ready to accept his mission as your own? Are you ready to allow that belief to infiltrate every area of your life? Are you ready to dig up your physical self that is simply fading away and be replanted with Christ's image that is an image of ever-increasing glory? I mean, maybe that's you this morning. And my hope is that if you're ready to do that, that you take steps this morning. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to come forward. You know, a lot of churches ask you to come forward, and I've found that a lot of times that is met with resistance. But my hope is that you'll talk to somebody. Talk to me. Shoot me a text. My phone number is in the bulletin. All you got to do is shoot me a text or give me a call. Talk to Richard. If you feel more comfortable talking to Richard or my wife or Hannah or any of the older members of our church who have been here for a long time, and you're like, man, I'm ready. I'm ready to experience that transformation. I want to do something different. If you want one practical step to take to begin to find transformation in God, and this is just something from my own personal practice, my encouragement to you would to begin to pray the Lord's Prayer every single day. Matthew chapter 6, if you're taking notes, Matthew chapter 6, verses 9 through 13. Pray the Lord's Prayer every day. Don't just pray what's there. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Expand on that. Talk about how holy, how amazing, how set apart God is. Talk about his creation. And then he says, your kingdom come, your will be done. And so begin to pray that God's kingdom would come in your life, which is, experienced through his will. Like his kingdom comes when his will is done. Give us today our daily bread. Speak to God. Ask for your daily needs, your daily requirements. And forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. Ask for forgiveness, but in the midst of that, begin to forgive the people who have hurt you, who have wronged you, who have betrayed you. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. That's a transforming prayer. As you step into that prayer and as you commune with God in that way, you begin to be changed. You begin to realign yourself each day with God's will and God's direction, God's focus for your life. And this is what transforms you. This is part of the incarnation, right? To align ourselves with him and to be transformed. And so that's my last, encouragement today is just let's be transformed together. Let's be changed. I know too many Christians who have grown up in the church, been in the church for their entire lives, and they are not changed. They are not transformed. They still speak the same way. They still look at the same things. They still act the same way. They try to, put on a front whenever they show up in the auditorium at church. But as you go into their lives, if you were to follow them along, nothing has changed. And my invitation to all of us is let's be transformed. Let's be part of the change in our world because, guys, our world is just so broken. It's just so broken. All you got to do is look at the news for a little bit and see all the wars that are going on in Israel and in Ukraine and in Africa, and you can see all the drugs that are going on in our world, and you can see all the broken relationships and marriages and everything that is just so broken. We have to be part of the solution. Let's be changed. Let's be transformed by the love that Christ brings into our lives. But you will not be transformed if you don't encounter the incarnation on a regular basis through prayer, through the word, through being with God's people. All those ways are ways that you can encounter the incarnation and begin to be changed. So let's be transformed together. Let's stand. Let's sing together.